Hello and welcome to today's workshop. Today we will be focusing on the Bluebell Awakening SVG USB. So what we're going to be doing is taking a quick look at some of the files included on the USB. I've already cut these out because then we can really have fun with composition and layering to create a really lovely little book project here as well. So quick overview of the USB. What we have included is Spring Awakening, the Nook, we have the Avery and also Bluebell Wood. 4 lovely collections you would have previously seen in die format, which have now been brought to you in SVG format to work alongside specifically your Brother Scan and Cut, but any machine that will read an SVG file. What I've done first off is I've plugged my USB into the side. If you need any helping hand at any stage with any advice or lessons or education in regards to the scan and cut machines, both the SDX and the CM models, I can wholeheartedly recommend Mel's monthly workshops that are available on YouTube to watch back and the education content therein. So USB plugged into the side, we're going to start up machine by pressing the home button once it's already on. If you've been working on a project previously, it'll always say, do we need to change anything? The carriage is going to move. That's fine. It's just a little warning note. And then we are good to go. So to retrieve the information off our USB, we hit retrieve data and go into our USB symbol. So far, so good. And then we've got all our files that are included within the USB, okay? Now the first design that we're going to be working with is the book, which is found in the Avery. It released as a die set alongside the Avery collection, and just down here you'll see a fundamental book. Now I thought it was really important just to go through the detailings of this particular file, just so you understand the order in which these have been laid out for you. So as you'll be familiar with, if you're a 2 Red Robins SVG USB enthusiast, you'll have detailed cuts, matte cuts, reflections and cuts, okay? That's pretty standard across the board. The detailed cuts are where you're going to find most of the book design. The matte cuts then complement the reflection cuts as well, and those two work in tandem. We're going to be focusing on detailed cuts right here. And this is where you'll see all of the different elements for the book and also the additional flower designs that were created to embellish the book as well. So first things first, we want to cut the outside, the matte layer, the beginning layer of our book, and we go into that first file here. It will bring up the design on the screen so you can see clearly what is included. We're going to say OK, and then that information is going to drop down into our workplace. For this project, I am simply going to be using this outline die of the book open. You can tell it's the open book because it has this little rounded effect on the spine itself. If I click on edit and then just select elements on my mat, come down and just select those these are like little book corners. These are tabs for the corners of the book. Unselect the book die cut itself or SVG cut itself, leaving just the tabs selected. Click OK and bin those off. We can say OK. That leaves us with just the book element. Now I'm going to cut that on a nice heavyweight cardstock because this is going to be the base level of my book. Once that cuts, it will look something like this. So this is cut at actual size as per loaded on the USB, okay, to give you a really good, clear indication of the kind of sizing we're working with. Of course, being an SVG machine and an SVG file, we can change the sizes of this should you wish to, okay? So that's our first cut. Nice heavyweight cardstock there. The next cut that we're going to do, we're going to mix and match between the layers just so you can really get a clear idea of how these files are laid out. We're going to go back to the home screen. We're going to say OK, back into our USB, then back into Avery, and again bring up that fundamental books. Remember, all of the book cuts are in the detailed cuts. And if we've already cut out our base layer, we want to move on to the next file in this selection. So we click on it. It will again give us an overview of what's included. If we click OK, we've then got options. So this is actually the top page of the book. Okay, so we've gone from the base to the top page, and included on this cut file are the 2 little aperture designs. So you've got one aperture here, which is a smaller size, and the other aperture here, a slightly larger size. So again, options for you at this stage. For this demonstration, I'm going to be working with the larger size. So we can click on the smaller size and delete that off. Again, don't worry, it's not deleting it off your SVG USB, it's just simply deleting it off your work mat. From this point, we want to have our aperture and our book aligned. So we can choose to select everything on our mat, click OK, and then we want to go into Object Edit and Alignment. You see the little crosses are the very center point of both the book design and then the aperture. If we decide to organize these so they are centrally lined up, but also lined up on top of one another, we can then move the aperture into place. So at the moment it's dead center of our book. If we click OK and OK and deselect everything on our mat, the book becomes selected. We can then tab through on our arrow keys and select just the aperture. At this point, this is really key, you don't want to drag and drop that aperture. You want to leave it in place because that is aligned centrally. We can go into our little arrows and just simply choose to move that across, okay? So now it is aligned centrally with the page itself to the center spine. If from that point you want to nudge it up slightly, you can do so on the arrows here, okay? It just gets you that first key element of having it aligned centrally, allows you to then go ahead and align it on the page easier. If we click OK and choose to select everything on our mat and OK, if you're happy with the layout and you don't want it to move, but you want the ability to move the project on the mat, perhaps over some pattern paper or background paper example, we can go into Object Edit and group those two items together, clicking OK, and now we can move that element all together and align it if we've scanned in a background paper, for example. Go ahead and cut that piece out, and that will then give us something that looks like this. So it's a smaller size of the pages, and it also then cuts in the aperture design, the foldback aperture, and it also puts the score lines, the dot dash lines in for us to create that fold back technique, okay? So at the moment, we've got something that looks like this, the background of the book, and then the pages of the book on top. We obviously want a matte layer to go on this, just so everything looks like it works together. So from here, once again, we're going to go home, and we're going to go OK, back into Retrieve Data, back into the USB, back into Avery, and back into the fundamental book. Detailed cuts for the book itself, we've used the base layer and the top layer with the aperture. We then have a choice of matte layers that we can include. So the first one is going to give you your largest size matte layer along with your largest size matte layers if you want to include perhaps a little page on top of a page, or if you want to include something like a surround for your aperture as well. We're going to click OK. And again, for this project, I'm working with the larger size elements, so we can delete those off. Click OK. I tend to drag this element over to the other side, line everything up on a color coordinated cardstock, for example, from the Craft Master range, cut that out, and that's going to give you your two elements just like so. So this gives you your matte layer in the purple and your matte layer for the pages. That's going to sit behind the last layer we cut. And then from there, you can play about with whatever size you want. But don't forget, you have got the little elements, just as you've seen with the matte layer here, that you can cut out from background paper or from pattern paper, for example. These can sit behind the aperture and then also on top of the design too. So that's all the cutting for this particular project. Of course, you could add more apertures. You could have an aperture on each page. You could have a matte layer on each page. Having them separately allows you to then pick and choose exactly how you want your project to be. So let's go ahead and start constructing this book itself. So we've got our base layer here. Remember, that's from a nice large size, or heavyweight, sorry, I should say, paper, cardstock, plain cardstock, and we're going to layer our matte layer from our Craft Master range straight on top of that like so. So remember, this is the largest matte layer on the USB, and that's going to give us a nice slimline design. Now for this, I'm simply going to stick the very, very center of the design, meaning if you did want to include more SVG cuts, or you wanted to include like a little secret message or something like that, or information, whatever it is, you then have the choice of lifting these pages and adding more detail to this project should you wish to. For me, I'm going to go ahead and use some of the slimmest line red liner tape, run straight down the center of that book mat layer, trimming that down and then just burnishing that into place. And this is then going to align with the layer underneath. So we're just looking to the points that would be centrally for this page, both top and bottom, making sure we've got the same white space surrounding all the way around the edges. Once we're happy with placement, we can go ahead and burnish that red liner tape down into place, giving us that opening effect to our book there as well. Next up, we're going to introduce the aperture layer, but I'm not going to stick just yet. I'm just putting it in place so I can bring in one of the background papers. This is cut from one of the Bluebell wood background papers, which is included on the USB itself. And we're just going to slot that behind the aperture and make sure we've got that nice and aligned so that sits. These little edges will fold back in just a second, but it's just to give you alignment to make sure everything sits perfectly. Once we're happy with alignment, I'm going to go ahead and stick that element in place. And to do that, what am I going to use? I think I'm going to use finger lift tape on this one. So I want a nice flat adhesion between the two layers. Just finding the end of my finger lift tape there and just adding it to each side of this little aperture here. Now, because I've lined everything up centrally, it should mean that we've got a nice, easy way of aligning the aperture to the page as well, because that should sit with an even amount around the edges, aligned perfectly. Just folding a little tab over on the side of the finger lift tape there, just making sure we've got that nice and even before we pull the tape away like so. So at each stage of adding an element to this book, you could go ahead and start designing onto this. This would look lovely as a page in its own right. You could add your SVG file cuts from this too, a sentiment, whatever it is, whatever you want to include. For us, we're going to include that top layer that we cut with the aperture as well. Before we do anything else, we want to stick our red line tape, just as we did before, down the very, very center of that book page. Again, using that red liner tape and burnishing it down into place. And then also onto the fold backs themselves. Before I stick, I'm going to go ahead and encourage those fold downs round. So this turns in on itself, like so. Do both sides, just easing them into the center of the aperture there. And then coming around and folding that back on itself as well. It almost like makes a little box frame. It makes you a little lift from the page, between the pages there as well. I always suggest folding first because it makes it really super clear where you need to add your tape or your glue to then stick these in place. And also before sticking, rather than sticking everything flat, look how that aperture really frames that beautiful woodland in the background. It's a nice idea to come in and just gently curve. Just give those pages an ever such a gentle lift and a curve, following the line of the curved cut itself, just lifting this through. We don't want to bend this at all. We don't want to put any folds in it. It's just giving you that little lift between the layers, like so. To the center, we obviously want to encourage that line back. Again, not folding it, just encouraging it back so we can go ahead and stick that area. And we can also add our red liner tape to the inside of that little fold back on itself too. Reason I'm using red liner tape is because it's a nice strong adhesive tape. And when we're looking at things which are more of a construction element, it does work really, really well to have something a little bit more secure on your tabs, on your designs, and for your projects as well. So red liner tape into place. As I say, it's easier to fold these back and then you rest assured, aren't you? You're not then worrying you're getting the tape in the wrong place. When it's folded back like this, you can clearly see which elements the tape needs to go onto. So at this stage, we want to stick that centerpiece down. We want to stick the 2 tabs down as well. So again, it's about finding your way of doing this. For me, I like to make sure one side is even. Again, using those points, top and bottom, to help me align. Holding my hand in place. On the left, we can come in with my right hand, or other way around if you're the other way around handed. Take away that center fold, and also take away the tape or the carrier sheet for the tape on that first tab. Make sure that first tab is folded back, and you want to stick your center and your inner tab roughly at the same time. Okay, so that's giving you a nice little aperture area like so. We then want to come in and just gently encourage that page round. Remember, we have curved this slightly as well. Encourage that round so the other side can sit nipped in to continue that curve. Remove the carrier sheet on the red liner tape and then just stick that on the other side, burnish that down, and that gives us a little aperture, that gives us a whole little world into which we can start adding our story into. Remember, the other side of our page, you can just curve that slightly. You know, we've rounded it already, but just giving it an extra little lift there. We've then also cut, if you want to include this, your matten layer of the same lovely sort of woodland scape there, just to fill that white space. So one's going to come towards you, one's going to go back. To emphasize that, we are going to lift these matten layers on a little bit of foam tape. So to maximize the contrast between the two, let's go ahead and use some 5mm foam tape on that first matte layer, just trimming it down, taking it just in from the edges, and then we're looking for any areas that would need an extra little bit of support, just through the center to keep that center lifted from the background of the card design as well. Onto this, we can include our background, but I think rather than sticking completely flat, it might be nice to play around with the heights of this. So this time around, rather than 5mm tape, let's go in with a 1mm tape, so you've got a little bit of lift, just like so, trimming this down just as we did before, so you've got that support through the center and the design itself. And just one more little stretch of foam tape, trimming that down and adding that to the other side. So again, differences between the 2 layers mean it's going to give a different type of focus. It's going to draw the eye and give it a little bit of prominence on the front of your card as well. Aligning that background so it sits within that matte layer nice and evenly. Then taking away the carrier sheet for the tape. Remembering those middle ones are just there for support, so we don't have to worry about those too much. And that's then going to sit lifted again on our page as well. So just giving you options there. You can stick these flat, you could have both sides with a matte layer, both sides with an aperture, mix and match. Remember, you've got the different sizes of the aperture as well, which is fun. Or, of course, because we're working with those SVG files, you could absolutely come in and change the sizes of these should you wish to too. So again, just looking to the background of our design, making sure we're getting that nice and aligned before we remove the carrier sheet of the tape. Both sides to stick. Let me just grab my tweezers to help me grab that bit of tape. Come on, little bit of tape. There we go. And then just smoothing that down into place. So that's given us our base for our card design. So from this point, it really is up to you how you want to decorate it. For me, I wanted to include a few different SVG cuts from the USB itself to give you options of how you could tell your story. But remember, you could decorate all the pages here as well. So let's just grab a couple of designs. Maybe we want to take the bear's ear from Bluebell wood. Maybe that wants to sit in the foreground. As soon as you place anything on top of the aperture, that's going to come first and foremost through the design. That's going to really be at the forefront of your project. Of course, we do have different sizes preloaded, so you could use a couple to then layer that up. We could, of course, then mirror that on the other side. So anything we put down on one side, let's think to adding a mirror image or a mirror design or feel to balance that composition. It might be that we want to include something to run up the side of this particular aperture design. Again, drawing in the focus, looking to colours that go beautifully together. So blue on blue, a few little bluebells, something like that perhaps. It might be that we want to then include characters. We've got more florals we could go at, but setting out this kind of idea first off is a great way of designing. We also need to consider the aperture. Maybe something like the lovely little cottage from the Nook collection would work spectacularly in amongst our bluebells and our bluebell wood and our background trees. So we could slot that down right into the inside of the aperture, have that as a placement in the design. Furthermore, you could have it on the other side, like so. Again, it's just about placement, it's just about ideas. Maybe you want to scale that up and go for something larger where it's coming off the sides of your design, layering it with your florals as well. That's gives them kind of a like Hansel and Gretel kind of storybook feel to that particular idea. So let's just keep the houses out. They may feature. It might be that we want to include some of our characters, for example. You know, maybe our little glue tips could be sitting on top of part of the aperture or the matte layers. They could feature. Maybe we could take, you could make this collection about squirrels. This would be quite fun. We could take the little squirrels from the Spring Awakening, for example, one each side. We've then got squirrels that could be included from Bluebell Wood. So tell a whole story about, you know, the squirrels are out collecting their little nuts and things like that. Maybe they're friends with each other. Maybe they're coming in and saying, okay, which tree has the best nuts? What vicinity have you been working? Where can you guide me to for some more? Again, it's all about those stories. Maybe you're going to have Ryder and Tucker in the aperture as well. So you could have those slot into the design too. Again, the story, the tales you tell really, really are up to you. We do also have, I know I'm showing you an awful lot, but I do love these little animals. They are adorable. We have our little hedgehog. He is so sweet. He's found a little apple that he's nibbling away on. He could be in the background of our design, just having a little look. Now you see, I'm choosing to place the animals in a certain way. Wherever I've got an animal which is facing essentially in, I'm placing it on this side. Wherever I've got an animal, again, facing in the opposite direction, I'm placing it on this side. That draws the eye through to the center. It keeps the focus on the card itself. Again, we have more birds within this collection. Jack and his trio of little friends, they could feature on this side. Again, because he's looking in this direction, you could have him on this side. Remember, we do have the reverse reflections as well. So if you did want to mix these, match these up, you absolutely can do so. So characters, I mean, let's just choose these as we go. Little house in the background, possibly. What else? We've got lots of lovely florals with this collection and design. The bench, we've got a few bits of architecture. Again, it's just scoping out how you want it to be. So for me, I think it would be really fun to include a little story about our little squirrel in the background there, but I want to trim him down so he fits within the aperture. Of course, what I could always do is just lift the aperture slightly and stick that in, but I think actually it might be just as good to shape him and slot him into the design there as well. So he's coming forward from that. That looks quite fun, doesn't it? It's quite nice to give that a little bit of shaping. If you are popping something in your aperture which sort of expands the realms of the aperture itself, it's an idea to stick that first before going ahead and sticking the aperture in place. But actually, I quite like how that's worked out with having that three-dimensional too. So Ryder for that side. So we're going with this kind of squirrel theme. So I think let's go with squirrel on this side to tell the story. Maybe a hedgehog. We'll see when we get there. But I think let's start building in the flowers. Now, just like you would do for your dies and things like that, it's always best to add a little bit of shaping to your floral designs. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my ball tool and just shape in a few of these flowers. So one way to make the petals curl backwards, and then a little bit of a ball tool to the center to bring that forward. We can then encourage that further and shape it further with our thumb and forefinger. The important thing to note is because these are outline cuts, you don't want to go too mad with the shaping because the card itself Unlike your dies, which put lots of little cut line details in, that then stays completely blank, okay? If you want to go into the detailed cuts, you can absolutely do that. But most of what I work with for the SVGs for this particular look is the outline dies. It's the reflections and cuts, okay? So you don't want to go too overboard with the shaping because the cut lines, the detail in the cardstock, whereas just having it sort of en masse in one outline cut doesn't do that. So just go careful with your shaping, but there's nothing stopping you still shaping everything. So little bit of the bear's ear florals there, just shaping those through in the same fashion, no matter the size that we've cut those, and using my poker tool just to lift and shape those little leaves as well, just turning the ends of those up and tucking in. So that's my first little cut. Same thing with the bluebells. Just gently lifting those on the foam pads and again shaping through the leaves on those two. I'm just placing to get the placement first off before I go ahead and stick, just to get the options in these because I want to do quite a lot of tuck-ins. I want to repeat the colour play across these as well. Little florals, I do want to feature that, so we've got a tie in between the colours. So let's just lay him there and let's just shape our lovely little squirrel as we're thinking about it. Looking to the size of the piece, looking for a ball tool relative to that size, starting at the edge to draw the cardstock in, and then giving that a little gentle shaping. We're not looking to put creases into the card at all, we're just looking to shape that through. Again, further shape it with your thumb and forefinger, and let's just shape these little florals too. So we've got detailing. Now, a lot of what you're going to see when it comes to shaping and things like that is quite a repetitive process, but it is well worth taking the time to do that. So at the moment, we've got a lot of blue on blue. We have got this overrunning theme of the purple, of the sort of lavender hues as well. So I thought it would be nice to draw in a few of those colours. So let's look to the reflection artwork. We've got the lovely lavender from the Avery collection. We have some lovely little green greeneries and details from the book die itself. So let's take those to the side and let's look through the nook because it could be that we include, yes, here we go. That's a lovely sort of combination of the purple and the blue together. So again, it's that colour story coming together. Everything then works in tandem. And we've got some really lovely bright green leaves and some lovely blue florals from the Spring Awakening as well. So they will probably end up featuring along with some of the long line designs too. So once we've kind of auditioned our our SVG cuts, and we're getting to that point where we're nailing down what we're including colour-wise, what we're including character-wise, the collections start really forming itself. The ideas really then start coming together. And just put my birdies back there. Okay, so we need another little blue. Let's grab one of these and grab another. You'll see me always grab two, and that's just simply for that balance effect of where we might put one side and we might then repeat that on another side as well. I'm just going to pop out the little design of the cutaways there. Just encourage those out with my poker tool. It's just where they've caught on the blade, and then shaping just like so, and then also shaping those leaves out as well. Remember, it's all about texture, it's all about adding that lift. So it could be, think about your layering. If you want your squirrel more in the foreground, it doesn't matter if we cover up most of these leaves. In fact, it might be that we trim away, I won't do it just yet, just in case, but it might be we trim away the longer line on that leaf just to nip it in a little bit, and then have him nestled. So again, it's that colour reflection. But because we put it one side, we want to include it on the other, but it might not be that I want to include the whole thing. So I'm going to pop that to one side. These are going to work very well because you're going to get another height on the design. These are from the Nook, and these are more like a little budlier feel to them. Just tidying up anywhere where it's caught on the cardstock there, just then poking out any excess as well. So one thing with the working with an SVG file on the SDX and also the CM models, as opposed to the dies, it's obviously a straight cut blade, okay? So you don't get those kind of chamfered edges that you might be used to if you're new to this and you're previously been a die cutter. You don't get the same chamfered edges that you see or the beveled edges that you see on dies, but by using the ball tool just on the edges and through the look of the card, it softens that feel as well. So that's a great little tip there. Gonna lift and just tuck those in behind, a little jaunty angle, moving the bluebells up so they're now coming around the top of that aperture, but it's just a little hint of design in there. Let's grab another one. So we've done one side, we want to include it on the other, but again, we might trim this down and come at it from another point of view. Just shape those through, just taking away the little excess bits. And then just shaping, just so it softens that edge. And we're just moving that cardstock over, okay? Greens are going to leave for a little bit, lavenders are going to leave for a little bit, just because these are going to work as little tuck-ins. So let's go ahead and get the main florals stuck in place, and of course our little characters stuck in place too. Now to stick, I'm going to be using Pinflair glue gel. It's my glue gel of choice. It gives me lift, it gives me dimension, but it also means I've got a little bit of wiggle room with it. So wherever I'm placing my main design, we're going to just keep looking and layering and then coming back to those. The foreground piece I'm going to put first, so that gives me that anchor. It gives me that sort of cut-off point of where every other floral is going to come from. So this on slight angle, so it's kind of following the eye into the center of the aperture there. Just looking for an area, so around here, whereby we can stick that SVG cut directly onto the area of the surround of the aperture without going into the aperture itself. So a little bit down the bottom, like so. And just angling those leaves and those petals in. Absolutely fine to come over the edges of the matte layer itself, as long as you're keeping them, if you're looking at posting or anything like that, within the realms, of the base card as well. Having them coming over the edge makes it feel more realistic. You've got this lovely flow. It also draws the matte layers in and makes it look part of the design. Looks like it's meant to be. I'm going to squidge out a little bit of my bookbinding glue as well onto my mat, just so I've got something to go at here. And I'll be swapping and changing between the glues, and I will voice why when I come to use it, I'm changing it. So front one here, lifted on Pinflair glue gel, so this front cut here, lifted on Pinflair glue gel, so I've got the ability to lift and tuck should I wish to. This background piece, again, looking at where it's going to sit within the design and only adding a little bit of glue, using my glue applicator so I can get into a nice fine element of that. The rest, if I need to stick at any point these elements up here, I can come back and do that later on. This is just so I can get that placement spot on. I'm not going to go ahead and stick that down hard. I'm just going to look and check my other florals that I want to include. Here we've got more green. Here we've got a little bit of that sort of mid-blue purple design. So tonally it's all going to work together. But again, same thing. We're just layering that over, looking for the anchor point, if you like, of the glue itself, dabbing that on with the glue applicator, just lifting those little florals, tucking these ones down so you can't see where the end point is in any of the little aperture bits of this front floral here. So I'm talking about this little place here. You don't want any cut-off points within that. Angling them back slightly so they feel like they're coming out at a different angle. So it's not all coming up just directly straight. They've got a little bit of an angle, and it's also filling that area where we just had leaves. Once we're happy and we're making sure everything's aligned, we can go ahead and stick these. This floral here, this buddleia, is then overlapping the bluebell. So again, you haven't got any areas where it's just like a straight edge or anything like that. They're all layered on top of one another. Similarly, we're going to come in with our other little bear's ear and just tuck that behind, letting the leaves overhang and letting it really then hug into this aperture. As we did before, just checking for placement, making sure the glue, the Pinflair glue gel, is then lifting the background there, We don't want any sort of areas here where there's little, we could draw the eye, a little bit of white. So just tuck those florals in, tweak them so they're at a slightly different angle to the original, the one that we laid down, and then overlapping that little edge to the baseline. We don't want to go over the baseline of the card, but it's okay to go over the edge of the matte layer there. So we've got enough florals there for the moment. Let's just work on the other side here as well. So we already shaped our long line design, but I don't want this sort of longer leaf coming over the edge of the card there. No problem at all. We can just go in, follow the artwork down and snip that one away. Again, I'm happy if the flowers come over the edge just ever so slightly, as long as they don't go over the edge of the base card. Just looking for placement of how it's going to sit with our little squirrel there as well. So that sits quite nicely. It's almost like a little halo around our little squirrel. Once again, a little bit of glue. Again, lifting it because we've shaped it. So we're using the pin flare to lift at this point. Just looking for placement for our little squirrel. Okay, so the squirrel's going to lay over the top of that particular floral. Have his feet aligned with the bottom of the background topper that you've created. If you were to put him, excuse me, like so, even just a little way up, it kind of jars the eye. It now looks like he's floating in air. Just by taking the time to nudge him down, have him, so you've got a little bit of the stem of the florals showing. The florals are also then aligned with the bottom, and his feet are grounded along the bottom of the topper. He then sits properly in space and time. He looks like he has, you know, just probably jumped out of the woodland there, and he's coming towards the front of the card. His little feet are gripping onto the edge of that topper, and it all just makes sense. So there he is. Just tweak those florals and just tweak again to make sure he's aligned and his little feet stay in place. And then gently push down, not really hard, just gently pushing so that glue then grabs. This little floral, again, just coming over the front, but again, notice the placement. We haven't popped it here because then that little corner of the topper jars the eye. It draws the eye too much. Just angle it slightly so you're getting that corner covered and also part of that squirrel covered. That pushes the squirrel back a stage in perspective, but it also makes him feel nestled into the design itself. A little bit of pin flare, again, because we're lifting this particular layer and just coming in for placement, tweaking that round. So we've got the leaves sitting nicely over the front of our squirrel. At the moment, looking really sweet, everything's then working together. I mentioned how if we put one little bit of blue down one side, it's nice to then try and repeat that on the other. So I'm just looking to my cut here and thinking, okay, can I perhaps fit this in? Would it be too much if I put the whole thing in behind the bear's ear? We can just try. Yeah, that's going to fight too much with the layers underneath. But there's nothing stopping me coming in and just taking a couple of these florals away. Using my scissors, or in fact you could use the decoupage layers for this particular design on the USB. The option is there. Just taking a few, we could have them just dotted around, giving you the hint. It's then picking up the same colour that we've got on the other side, but it's not over the top, which I think is really important. It then just all works together beautifully. So again, I'm looking to these three because I think that's a kind of nice structured feature that could go into the other side. So let's trim down on the leaf itself. Maybe we'll want to include that one, so coming around. Again, just being very selective over the areas we're cutting and using. And just trim. Don't worry too much about a straight edge there because we can hide that behind layers as well. Something quite fun is to have them coming over and out of the design, so tucking them in behind and then drawing them through to the foreground of the design. Another little tip, we've got the buddleias here. I'm not going to be too worried about repeating the bluebells on the other side because they're quite a delicate design and that just lines that wonderful side nicely. But I do want to include more of this kind of feel to the other side. The green is great because that's going to fill this little space we've got just behind the squirrel, and of course the angle of these works perfectly. But I do want to take this one little one off to one side Again, just trimming that away, making sure that all works. And then in, I think it's a buddleia. It looks like a buddleia. That one goes. You see how instantly that then creates its own little bouquet around our squirrel, making sure our squirrel stays in place, making sure that comes out at a nice angle and overlaps. That then gives us another one of the buddleias that we can come in and further tell the story here. So you've got some going up this side, perhaps even some coming out along the bottom. It could be that we change tact and have these creeping along the bottom edge of that particular design. So you've got almost like this crescent design coming through, which works quite nicely. I might go ahead and stick those because I'm quite happy with that placement. That's what's lovely about having lots and lots of SVG cut files to go at. You can then audition them. You can take a picture. If it's something you really, really like, take a picture as a reference point, come back to it as well. And then you've got options to layer that through. A little bit of glue just to anchor that bottom edge. And remember, we can go back in and anchor it more so if we need to. But you've got the florals layered over like so, which is great. I feel we need something to this side, but I think it's going to be the lavender, and I think we need something to this edge just to fill in with a little bit of green. So let's look to, these are the SVG cuts which come in with the fundamental book design. These are great for adding a little bit of texture, a little bit of more of a long line feel without overwhelming the whole look of the card. We've got a little bit of Pussy Willow in there as well, which is very sweet. Again, giving you that tall nature, and short ones as well. So again, just grabbing a few cards, not being too precious about which ones I'm using. I might use them all, I might use some, I might use none at all, but at least I've got the option there. So at the moment, if we look at the design, the composition's fine. At the moment, we've got a shorter composition, a more compact composition, and then something which is a bit more sprawling on the other side. It needs a little bit of titivation to bring it together. What if we mirror this long line here with a little bit of a long line with the lavender? That instantly draws in the eye without overwhelming the design and the look. So let's go ahead and stick that lavender in place. That's quite a nice way of drawing the eye upwards and just lengthening this composition a little. So just tucking that in behind. It could be that we take it right to the edge, swipe away some of the excess glue. Don't worry about the glue, it will dry clear. And then that kind of gives you a mirror there. So obviously we've placed one there, we need to place some on the other side as well. Just running through from the buddleia up, one stem of the lavender works quite nicely. Again, we're working with this very particular colour theme of the blues and the lavenders because they really do pop against the colour of the squirrel's fur as well, which is quite sweet. Gonna lift and tuck, again making sure the bottom of the lavender isn't overlapping in any unsightly places. We've got those little florals to stick in as well. Tweezers would be helpful right about now. Where have you gone? You will do. Tweezers, just so it keeps my fingers out of the way when I'm trying to add glue and things like that. A little bit of lift on the back of these for the pin flare, and just softening the edges through. It's only a subtle little detail, but it really will draw in the flowers from the other side. Here, I'm still not happy with this edge, so let's look to our greenery that we have. Let's audition some. Let's see. We've got quite a vibrant green from the Spring Awakening collection, which could help to curve round, which might look quite nice, but I would have to repeat it on the other side, just to make it make sense. So could we get away with that? Like so. I think that might be the answer. So the shorter one on this side. Let's go ahead and do that. Again, it's all about looking for balance, okay? We don't want to overwhelm the card too much, but we want enough detailing in so the compositions hang together. We're kind of going for short and, I don't want to say fat, but short and fat on this side, and then a more sprawling design on this side. It might be that I trim down this one ever so slightly. So again, trimming and cutting around. Gonna just use my pokey tool to remove the little cutaway bits. Neaten those holes up a little bit. And again, shape as we go. This one, just using a little bit of the bookbinding glue behind to anchor it. And I'm just going to lift my florals and tuck those leaves in as well. Excuse me, florals. Again, just nipping that all in so it all sits together. And then layering back over. Just like so. So having the ability to then really pick and choose where we are layering, because we're using that pin flare glue gel, gives us time to work. Do you see how by adding that green in, those flowers now aren't floating in space, and it brings the curve of the design around that corner. Just then, mirror in that colour. Let's look for another one of those smaller cuts possibly. Just coming in to this side here, poking away that excess, lifting and tucking behind. Again, just a hint. That's all you need to draw that story together. Once we're happy with placement, let's go ahead and stick that one down in place as well, because I think this is going to be quite a sweet little composition, filling that little gap of white space where it needs it and coming out at another angle, just coming in with the same angle of the buddleias and the way the lavender is going to, I think we are almost done. How does that look? Little quick tip, if you're kind of getting blind to how the composition is going, how it's coming together, take a step back, lift it up and look at it. Go off for a cup of tea, come back again, have a fresh set of eyes on it and think, okay, is there anywhere that I need to add in? And you know what? Just a few little tweaks. We don't want this white of the aperture poking in. We want that covered by the Bluebell's leaves and stem there. Just tweaking placement to make sure everything's sitting nicely and we've got no glue overhanging. I think I'm pretty happy with that composition. What do you think? That's just a few of the little characters, a few of the little flowers and things like that. But think to how you could utilise all the different little elements within this as well. Hopefully you've enjoyed us taking you through the details from the Bluebell Awakening SVG USB. Thank you for joining me on this workshop, and I can't wait to see what you make with this as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
If you want to see more from Highlight Crafts, make sure you click the like button, subscribe by clicking the subscribe button below, and click the bell icon to receive notifications of all of our future content. You can also click here to see our latest video, or click here to see more videos like this one.